I waited 8 years just to say I waited 8 years for this? It's fair to say, at this point, Metroid Prime 4 is an infamous title. I mean, it already was an infamous title for how long it took to not only come out, but just to get any information about it. For over 5 years, the only major info we had on this game was some dog shit temporary ass looking logo. But then we finally got an official look at the game during the summer of 2024. But unfortunately, by that point, it was too little, too late. What they showed was impressive, but I didn't hear a ton of people actually talking about it, mainly because it didn't really show us anything new about Metroid Prime 4. It just showed us that Metroid Prime 4 was kind of just more Metroid Prime. And upon the actual release of the game, kind of feels like that's all this game really set out to do, was just be more Metroid Prime, because as it turns out, this game went through hell and back through development. And you can tell with the final product that they kind of just wanted to get a decent game out there so then they can move the hell on. And you know what? I just recently beat Metroid Prime 4, so it is fresh in my mind, so I kind of just want to go through the nearly decade-long wait for this game alongside my fresh-ass thoughts on the game, i.e., I'm gonna bitch about the ending for a while. Listen, Metroid is no stranger to taking long hiatuses between some games. I mean, we technically had one from Super Metroid to Metroid Prime / Metroid Fusion, which both released on the exact same day. Now, Metroid's place in Nintendo's lineup has always been a little funky. You know, like, Metroid has always been seen as one of the all-time titans throughout video game history, one of the greatest franchises. It's inspired so many games, all of which have sold better than Metroid ever did. But yeah, the thing is, Metroid has never been like an outright failure, but it's never really reached the same heights as a lot of Nintendo's other franchises. I mean, the best-selling game in the franchise for a while there was the original Metroid Prime, and it didn't even crack 3 million. That still sold pretty damn well, but I mean, you compare it to a lot of Nintendo's other series, and yeah, Metroid is definitely on the lower end of the priority list for Nintendo. But even though it's never reached the same kind of popularity, I think it's pretty obvious Nintendo's always cared about Metroid, but, you know, obviously, again, it's lower on the priority list. I'd argue was almost always due to Nintendo trying to find the right developer for each of the Metroid sub-series, whether it's 2D Metroid or Metroid Prime, because currently Nintendo's internal development structure, they don't have a dedicated Metroid team that makes Metroid games in-house. That's why for Metroid Samus Returns and Metroid Dread, they outsourced that to Mercury Steam and worked with them to get those games out. Now, Retro Studios is a Nintendo-owned developer, but after Metroid Prime 3, it's obvious Retro kind of wanted to move on and do something new. You know, those initial 3 Metroid Prime games, that kind of wrapped up a full trilogy there. Thus, Retro moved on to Donkey Kong, and after Tropical Freeze in 2014, a lot of reports and leaks have shown that Retro tried to do so many different games, but a lot of them never really got past the conceptual stage, or they just flat out got canceled. In fact, a build of a game they were working on in 2017 called Harmony leaked, so obviously Retro was working on stuff around the time that Metroid was actually starting to get resurrected. So in 2016, we got Metroid Prime Federation Force, kind of a spin-off side game in the Metroid Prime series, developed by Next Level Games, who did Luigi's Mansion 2, Mario Strikers, Punch-Out. They're a great developer, but I think at the time, they were kind of seen as like, just throw some fucking franchise at them, who the hell cares? Because look at their history. They did Mario Strikers, Punch-Out, Luigi's Mansion, and then Nintendo gave them Metroid Prime, and not just regular-ass Metroid Prime, a spin-off focusing on the Galactic Federation for the 3DS. I'm not saying a game like that couldn't work or anything, but I think that being the first Metroid game after 6 years since Metroid Other M, which already left a bad taste in everybody's mouth, to put out a first-person Metroid game focused on multiplayer on the 3DS, there's just a bunch of crap there that it's just, I don't want any of this. I don't want a first-person game on the 3DS. I don't want a multiplayer Metroid game that doesn't even focus on Samus. On top of the game having this weird, cutesy, big-ass head art style. Federation Force definitely wasn't like a bad game at its core, but it was an unnecessary one in a game that nobody really asked for. It wasn't really scratching any kind of itch. I think it would have made a lot more sense for that game to be a home console game on Wii U, but then again, you know, if you put that out on Wii U, that being an HD online multiplayer game, like, it would have cost significantly more to produce that compared to just making it for the 3DS. However, even though Federation Force sold like ass and kind of was ass, it did show there was life in the Metroid series, and specifically the Metroid Prime series, because at the end of Federation Force, there's a cliffhanger ending focusing on Psylocke from Metroid Prime Hunters, which this was also something that was hinted at the end of Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. Oh, apparently the Metroid Prime series is really building up towards something. Strange, because the Metroid Prime trilogy definitively sort of ended with Metroid Prime 3. However, they did kind of imply, hey, we got big plans for Psylocke, a character that debuted in Metroid Prime Hunters, and he wasn't necessarily like that big of a deal in that game. He was just one of the many hunters in that game. There wasn't really a ton about him that you knew. I'm sure somebody at Nintendo just thought, yeah, this guy, I like his design. Let's flesh him out more in the future. So in the Metroid fan base, it's always been kind of known that Prime 4 was going to focus on Psylocke. Psylocke was going to be the next enemy or main antagonist of the Metroid Prime series. Nobody really knew why. Nobody really cared about this character outside of the fact that it was obvious the seeds were being planted for him to be the next major antagonist. It's just kind of weird that it's like, okay, this character started appearing in the DS spin-off of Metroid Prime, and then they just kept on teasing him for years. And again, he had like absolutely no character prior to Metroid Prime 4. Spoiler alert, he still doesn't have any goddamn character in Metroid Prime 4, but I digress. The only reason anybody even remembered Psylocke or was even talking about Psylocke is because Nintendo kept teasing him at the end of these damn Metroid Prime games as to like, oh yeah, he's gonna be a big deal. Now, I do think it is kind of cool that like they kept teasing a fucking character from a 2006 DS side game and being like, he's coming, don't worry. And he does finally make his grand appearance in this game. When they finally showcased Metroid Prime 4 in 2024 and they showed Psylocke at the end of the trailer, it was kind of like, yo, what the hell? That was definitely cool, but more so with the fact that it finally happened rather than, oh my god, I can't wait to see this fucking character. This is so fucking cool. Psylocke is awesome. Anywho, going back to Federation Force, that obviously proved there was still plans for Metroid Prime to continue. And now looking at interviews Nintendo did surrounding Metroid Prime 4 shortly after the game's release, it turns out Metroid Prime 4 really got kicked off mainly because Nintendo of America went to Nintendo in Japan and said, hey, we think it would be a great idea to bring back Metroid Prime. We think it would be a good idea to do a new Metroid Prime game. Because, well, historically, Metroid has always done very poorly in Japan. It definitely has more of an audience out here in the West. So this is all starting to make a lot more sense because at E3 2017, during Nintendo's E3 Spotlight, they put in there a teaser for Metroid Prime 4, or at least like one of these things where they have to use the phrasing Metroid Prime 4 now in development for Nintendo Switch. I've come to find that a lot of trailers that use that phrasing literally just means, yeah, we just got started. Or we're not even started yet. We just kind of greenlit this title. And now seeing that this was kind of a request from Nintendo of America, I think Nintendo of America saw that there was so much just thirst for Metroid to come back, and specifically the Prime series. You know, the Prime series has consistently been talked about as like, wow, damn, this is a hardcore game. And I think Nintendo really felt like, hey, we kind of definitely need this. Especially when you see how the original developers of Prime, Retro Studios, started working on Donkey Kong Country. When Tropical Freeze released, a lot of people were like, we don't need this, we want Metroid. And I think the Prime 4 teaser came at the perfect time to really showcase to everybody that like, damn, look at this. Nintendo's listening, and everything that you could possibly want is coming out for the Nintendo Switch. No, I know that right after Prime 4 was revealed at E3, they went into the Yoshi trailer. Oh, everything that I've ever wanted. The initial trailer just didn't show fucking anything. I mean, it was a cool trailer. The fact that you see the logo form and then a giant 4 come in, and then, oh man, the old-ass Metroid Prime logo next to a big-ass fucking 4. That's it. That's all that really ever showed. But I mean, right alongside this, after the E3 spotlight, Nintendo announced for the 3DS, Metroid Samus Returns. So it's like, damn, Metroid is finally back. This is so exciting. Of course, like I said, as it turns out, Retro Studios would not be developing Prime 4. Instead, Nintendo never officially said who was developing it, but I mean, rumors were already pretty much saying that Bandai Namco Studios in Singapore were developing this game. Definitely was gonna be a bit of a change. I mean, especially because the Metroid Prime series has primarily been developed by Western studios. Retro Studios is based in Texas. Next Level Games even is based in Canada. Hell, Nintendo Software Technology developed Metroid Prime Hunters on the DS, and that's actually a studio that's kind of based in Nintendo of America. That's like the only actual game developer within Nintendo of America. Because for the most part, Nintendo of America is just kind of here to localize and market stuff for the US. So I mean, I was keeping an open mind. However, a lot of the times when like game developers shift, that's always something to kind of be concerned about. It almost felt like, oh, well, Retro doesn't want to keep making these games, so we're just gonna throw it to some other fuckers. Just kind of feels like you're throwing it to a B team, you know, like the A team doesn't give a shit about this anymore. So yeah, all right, yeah, sure. One of Bandai Namco's subsidiaries, who cares? But hey, who knows? Even though Metroid Prime 4 didn't make an appearance in 2017 or 2018 for that matter, anytime Nintendo was asked about it, they were always saying development is progressing smoothly. Don't worry about it. It's looking good. And we're only going to showcase this game if we have something good to show. They never had anything good to show. In early 2019, Nintendo did that whole shtick where they upload a video of one of their guys in front of a white screen talking directly to the camera, pretty much announcing something they desperately did not want to announce, which is that a game is going to get delayed considerably. They've done this before with like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and they were doing this with Metroid Prime 4, talking about how the game was not shaping up how they wanted it to. Now, this is something I've always respected about Nintendo, the fact that they kind of take it very personally if they have to tell people, hey, we're delaying a game and we're not happy about it, but hey, we want to let you know that, like, yeah, we want this game to be really good, and it's currently not good enough, and we're pretty much restarting development. This is where they announced that Retro Studios would actually be taking over and going back to the Metroid series. Now, I feel like behind the scenes, a lot of stuff must have been happening. I don't know what the Namco version of this game looked like. I don't know what the actual problem was, and I don't know what was going on at Retro. I feel like they already had a bunch of canceled projects. They didn't know what their future was looking like. They didn't know what direction to go into, and I feel like there was a lot of stuff going on that made Nintendo realize we're bringing Metroid back to Retro. But hey, I wouldn't complain about that because Retro Studios has always been one of Nintendo's best developers. But with Nintendo fundamentally saying we're restarting the game from scratch, that kind of meant like, all right, well, if development started in 2017, then, yeah, okay, well, now development kind of truly started in 2019 at this point. And that makes sense considering this game released in 2025, so, yeah, it fundamentally kind of had a 6-year-long development time. Which is still an incredibly long amount of time. Throughout the next couple of years, the only major news coming out about Metroid Prime 4 was seeing a lot of job postings Retro Studios was making. A lot of times you'd see them posting stuff about kind of the cinematic side of game development, you know, like let's find people that can create great cinematics, which definitely bode well for how quality this game was gonna look. You know, it kind of felt like this was a game that was really gonna push the Metroid series forward visually and really focus on the story, which, you know, I mean, like, it could either go really well or really poorly. At one point in 2022, the Retro Studios Twitter account posted this art as their header. That was a big deal. That almost felt like, well, damn, they're probably gonna announce something soon. Oh boy. Well, it might not have been about Metroid Prime 4, but it was close enough. Metroid Prime Remastered was shadow dropped in early 2023 on the Switch eShop, eventually getting this physical release, which is still sealed because, you know, I couldn't help myself. A lot of times I'll buy something digitally, and then when a physical copy comes out, I'll buy it and I'll put it on my shelf, but it'll stay sealed because, well, I already have the digital copy. I waste fucking money. Okay. This remaster was actually developed by Retro Studios internally, with some help outsourced by some other studios that were well known for remastered projects. But I feel like this release was done to kind of get Retro back in the swing of things of the Metroid Prime series. Because keep in mind, it had been since Metroid Prime 3 in 2007 since Retro developed a Metroid game. And the team at Retro at this point in time was quite a bit different from that original developer. So while Retro Studios had a ton of new people, it was great to see Prime Remastered release because it showcased how Retro Studios still had that same flavor it always did. The art direction, the overall quality, the fact that they really fine-tuned every single aspect of the original Prime. This is the definitive version of Metroid Prime, and it was so damn nice to see. Of course, it would have been great to see Prime 2 and Prime 3 right alongside it if it was the Metroid Prime Trilogy remaster, but it's obvious they really wanted to go back to Metroid Prime's roots and offer this almost as a way to kind of wait for Metroid Prime 4, but also developing it to kind of get them back in the swing of things. And thankfully, the next year in June of 2024, at the very end of that June Nintendo Direct, full gameplay of Prime 4 was revealed. Best thing about this, we could stop using this goddamn logo. Now this is a logo, and it finally had a subtitle because all Metroid Prime sequels had subtitles. You had 2 Echoes, you had 3 Corruption, and now we had 4 Beyond. And yeah, visually, this game looked incredible, especially considering this was running on Switch 1 hardware. It's obvious Retro still had it. However, like I said, the trailer didn't show off anything really that crazy. I mean, visually it looked great, but overall, the game just kind of looked like it was Metroid Prime. They showcased a nice foresty area at the very end that ended up being Fury Green and gave a vague release window of 2025. Now, I thought that would have been like early to mid 2025. I think the initial expectation was that, well, this is releasing on Switch 1, and they made no mention of this also releasing on the Switch 2 at the time. I expected this to be like how Breath of the Wild launched on the Nintendo Switch and also came out on the Wii U on the same day. I thought this would have made a lot of sense as a launch title. However, I think what made Breath of the Wild so impactful was the fact that it appealed to not only a lot of hardcore Zelda fans, but also appealed to a lot of people that never played a Zelda game prior. It radically shook up the format, modernized it, while also innovating it and just kind of teaching a lot of other modern games a lesson or two. While Metroid Prime 4 looked like a quality game, it didn't look like it was doing anything you wouldn't expect a Metroid Prime game to do. It just didn't really seem like it was going to be that Breath of the Wild moment for Metroid. Rather, was just gonna be, hey, here's a new Metroid Prime game, which honestly should have kind of been one of the first major red flags here. The fact that it's like, okay, you're just showing that this is more Metroid Prime, but, you know, it kind of felt like, okay, we waited so long, and that's all you're really showing us? You know, if we wanted more Metroid Prime, well, we already got that a year ago with the original Metroid Prime. I think I kind of wanted to see what made this game so special, why it took so long to develop. I mean, again, you look at Breath of the Wild, that took a long time to develop, but it made sense when you saw it. Prime 4, I don't know, but I think I was kind of expecting to see that moment later on in a different trailer. Of course, the next time we saw this game was nearly a whole goddamn year later in March of 2025. We finally got like a full overview trailer during the Switch 1 Nintendo Direct the week prior to the Switch 2 Direct. And yeah, I gotta be honest, the presentation with the trailer here was pretty fucking boring. The main hook they revealed here was the psychic abilities Samus had, but the way they talked about them, again, was unbelievably bland. The main point I remember them saying was that, oh, with this psychic ability, Samus can open up doors and do things like this. I'm like, okay, like, oh, well, we can open doors with the psychic abilities. Okay, and the main thing the psychic abilities do that I think is like even somewhat noteworthy is how you can control the control beam. You know, you charge it up and everything goes in slow motion and you can control as it's flying through the air. I mean, that's definitely interesting for Metroid, but again, you know, that's nothing new. I look back at the beetle in Skyward Sword, like that, it does exactly that. Or God forbid I go back to fucking SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom, the cruise bubble? That's what that is. The March showcase wasn't bad at all, but it didn't really do anything to really sell anybody on Metroid Prime 4 other than people who already were gonna pick it up because they're fans of Metroid Prime. And then during the Switch 2 Direct, Nintendo showcased that this game was also coming to Switch 2. And there they primarily just focused on the fact that on Switch 2, it's gonna run at 4K 60 frames per second or 1080p 120 frames per second, which was nuts. And it also supported mouse controls, which was pretty cool. So yeah, that was probably where this game shined the most up to this point, was just showcasing that, like, yeah, this game is gonna run and look amazing on Switch 2. And during the Nintendo Treehouse streams where they showcased the first major portion of this game in the opening cutscene, just seeing a Nintendo game with a cutscene of this quality was incredible. Like, oh my god, this looks like on the same level as like PS5 games. Damn, it is obvious Retro really was pushing hard for this game to not just feel like, oh, it's just a Switch game or something. No, this is like a AAA modern game that also happens to be on Switch and Switch 2. But they still weren't talking about the release date. And I think in hindsight, you can definitely tell they were still trying to figure some stuff out. But we finally got one during the September 2025 Nintendo Direct. And this is where they fully revealed kind of like the main big thing about this game, which is the motorbike Samus has called Viola. And yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to Samus having a bike, you know, like Link has a bike in Breath of the Wild's DLC, but it's also like this reveal was kind of shown alongside like, oh, you know, Samus has the bike in this big ass open desert, really showcasing that like, oh, there's like a big open world element to this game. And nothing necessarily looked like, oh wow, this looks great. I mean, the sand in the desert looked kind of nice, but it's also like, okay, like it's a fucking desert. It doesn't look like there's a ton of stuff to do in it. Of course, when I saw this trailer, I kind of thought like, okay, well, you know, they're probably going to show that later down the line, or, you know, maybe when I play the game, you know, there's going to be something to do in the desert. That's a funny joke I told right there. Now, there is a theory that this game was kind of soft delayed. You know, it was never confirmed for any release date other than 2025. But when they initially revealed the amiibo at the end of that Metroid Prime 4 trailer, some of the amiibo were coming out alongside Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment in early November, which kind of is telling me that potentially Metroid Prime 4 was supposed to launch in early November, but then they pushed it to early December instead. So like, yeah, that adds up. Like, why the hell would a Metroid Prime 4 amiibo launch a month before the game alongside Hyrule Warriors? Unfortunately, Nintendo's marketing of this game was kind of quiet. Like, they weren't really trying to sell you on the game. It almost felt like, oh, well, maybe they're hiding things about this game. Maybe they want things to be a surprise or something like that. I don't know. But you look at how they marketed Metroid Dread when that was releasing, and they definitely put a lot of effort in Metroid Dread's marketing. Hell, they even put out like a cool collector's edition of Metroid Dread and whatnot. The trailers, I think they put a lot of effort into those, and Metroid Dread went on to become the best-selling Metroid game at the time, surpassing the original Metroid Prime, getting nominated for Game of the Year at the Game Awards. Metroid Prime 4 didn't really get a ton of that. Like, it definitely got a fair amount of trailers, but it didn't really get as much attention as you would think a game like this would deserve. I mean, it's been 8 years since they initially announced it. Quality-wise, it was looking really damn good, but when it came down to the gameplay and a lot of the features they were talking about in this game, nothing was really hitting it out of the park. It's like, you show off Viola. Okay, well, that's interesting. Samus has a bike now, but that's all it kind of boiled down to. Samus has a bike. That's all it was. There wasn't anything special about it outside of, oh, Samus looks kind of cool on a bike. They showed traditional Metroid Prime gameplay, which kind of just boiled down to, oh, Samus is in a morph ball sometimes, and Samus is shooting enemies a lot. I've said it before, but the combat in Metroid Prime, in the moment, it's fine, but like visually, it's just not very interesting. All it is Samus shoot, 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 maybe strafing, shoot, 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 shoot. But I think what was really troubling is the fact that a lot of previews were coming out about Metroid Prime 4, where people were talking about how there were some troubling elements of it, specifically the NPC characters. You know, oh, this game had you interacting with members of the Galactic Federation, and they were kind of a bit too hand-holdy. They kind of seemed like they were there to talk to you, to kind of push you into the right direction. Which, of course, you know, a big element of why people like Metroid is this feeling of isolation and figuring things out on your own, which having these NPCs alongside you pretty much ruins both of those qualities. And then when the reviews came out, no review was bad, but like the lowest score was like 6 out of 10 or so, which is not what anybody really expected or wanted to see from this game. You know, you had a couple of review scores that were like, oh, 10 out of 10. This is the greatest fucking thing I've ever seen in my life. But pretty much every game has that. Here on Metacritic, Princess Peach Showtime, 100. So, I mean, that didn't really mean much, but as it turns out, it feels like Metroid Prime 4 was a flawed but not awful game. It was just kind of like, it's good. Like, that's what it felt like. And after 8 years with a franchise as beloved and with the pedigree that Metroid had, after we got 2D Metroid back with Metroid Dread, and that nailed it, that hit it out of the park. And then to get the big boy, AAA, 3D return of Metroid Prime, and for it to just be good, it was just very unexpected for me. But upon playing it and getting through the game and recently beating it, yeah. This ain't a bad game, but it sure as hell ain't a great one. To describe Metroid Prime 4 in one word, I would call it underwhelming. Once again, it's not a bad game, but you can definitely tell this is a game that's kind of a hodgepodge of ideas throughout like a decade-long development time, and they kind of had to piece things together and try to make the most out of what they had. You know, and that makes sense. You know, with a lot of the stuff that I make, oftentimes I write down a lot of ideas I might have, and then it might get to a point where it's like, well, I need to put these ideas in a place that makes sense, so let's just do that instead of scrapping everything and starting over, because sometimes you just don't have time to do that. And you can tell that's what happened with Metroid Prime 4. Upon reading interviews, when they said back in 2019 they'd fundamentally be restarting development, they didn't actually mean the game is starting again from scratch. Retro Studios apparently had to move forward with a lot of the ideas started with that initial version of Metroid Prime 4. They couldn't truly craft the exact game they wanted to craft here. They had to pretty much pick up after somebody else started something. And while playing, I can see a lot of Prime 4's ideas just aren't fleshed out really. Something like Samus's psychic abilities seem like they're at the forefront of what makes Prime 4 unique. I mean, they're right there on the box, but at the end of the day, the psychic abilities really don't do jack shit. When the most unique thing about it is the fact you can control the control beam. Like, I don't know, like the idea of psychic abilities, I was expecting that to go further than it did, because again, at the end of the day, the coolest thing about the psychic abilities is something I've seen in a fucking SpongeBob game from 20 years ago. Viola really does not get any time to shine. I was almost expecting there to be like a big moment at the end of Metroid Prime 4 where everything all comes together. I was expecting maybe like the final boss fight to take place on the bike, since that was a huge part of the marketing, at least in the final trailer. I mean, you even have an amiibo of Samus and Viola. This is being pushed as like some big deal. But in the final game, there's nothing really that special about this bike. It is quite literally just a damn bike. It's literally just here to make this open world section make more sense and be remotely tolerable. But I don't want to get ahead of myself here. I think it's really easy to talk about the negatives with Prime 4 because they honestly stick out the most. The good things this game does are really damn good, but they aren't necessarily that special. It's not really within a lot of this game's like gimmicks. The best thing I can say about Metroid Prime 4 is at its peak, it is some of the best Metroid Prime has ever been. A lot of the environments, the feeling you get exploring these places, it is top tier Metroid stuff. But those experiences in Prime 4 are too scattered all over the place. There's great Metroid stuff in here, but it's kind of bogged down by this incessant need to kind of string you along in a linear fashion. Prime 4 is one of the most linear Metroid games, if not the most linear. And not only is it an incredibly linear experience, but it's an incredibly segmented and fragmented one. Each of the 5 main locations in the game are so separate from each other, it's ridiculous. Each of the areas almost makes this feel like it's 5 mini Metroid games stitched together with an awful open world kind of like connecting them all. And when I say connecting, I mean that incredibly loosely. When you're done with an area, you're pretty much done with that area. There might be 1 or 2 times you go back to it, but it's very rare. Like I said, very linear game. And even when they do ask you to go back to an area, one, they almost always have to point it out with Miles McKenzie telling you, hey, have you ever thought about going back to this area? Which is kind of annoying. Yeah, I don't think it's really a make or break kind of thing. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, that's kind of what a lot of games do when they're just not designed in a way where you can just kind of figure that out on your own. But that's the thing, the game pretty much has to tell you what to do sometimes, because I wouldn't think to do that. There's like a portion where I was just kind of aimlessly going around the desert and Miles McKenzie called me and is going, hey, actually, have you thought about going back to Volt Forge? Because, you know, you might want to go back there because now you can access some things with your new abilities. And like, yeah, that's a big part of Metroid is going back to areas, but for the most part, I don't really have to go back to a ton of areas to use my new abilities. I wasn't thinking, oh yeah, I'm gonna go back to Volt Forge of all places. Or near the end of the game when you're getting mech parts and they're all scattered across Soul Valley, but then randomly that last final one, Miles McKenzie has to call you and go, hey, have you ever thought about going to Flare Pool? I think the last mech part is there. And I'm just like, yeah, I mean, like, the fact that you have to tell me to go to Flare Pool, I'm like, why the f would I ever think about going to Flare Pool for a mech part when the other 4 things are just in this desert? So yeah, it's not really that fun to get your hand held through a lot of this experience, and a lot of people really don't like the dialogue in this game and the interactions between the Galactic Federation, and I'm kind of indifferent to it. At times, it can be a bit much. It can kind of feel like a little out of place, but at the same time, I do appreciate that, like, it does show, like, pretty human characters. Like, these characters, yeah, sometimes they might be a little annoying, sometimes they might be a little over the top, and a lot of times they're very cliche. You got the Sarge, you got Duke in the game. That's literally like the exact fucking, like, oh, the cop that's too old for this shit kind of guy. But I don't mind these characters being in Metroid. I just feel like they kind of need to dial things back or dial things up in certain cases, because they stick with Samus not talking. Samus is completely silent throughout the whole thing. The only time that you get anything from Samus is when she nods at a character, and at the very end, getting 100%, you see Samus's face. You know, it's kind of just a thing with Metroid Prime. Samus doesn't talk. But when you have so much more talking from all these other characters, it just feels out of place, because Samus isn't like this stand-in character that, like, oh, well, she's supposed to be silent so you can see yourself in her. No, when everybody else is talking and they're talking about certain things about Samus specifically, this is not a stand-in character for me. I don't feel like I'm Samus. So her not talking just feels out of place. She just feels like fucking weird. So for me, in future games, I'd really want them to kind of like reevaluate how things went with this, because I think either make Samus talk or figure out how exactly dialogue is gonna work in this game, because I think this doesn't really make Samus seem like this amazing entity that's this ruthless bounty hunter that's known by all these people and whatnot. No, in this game, Samus seems like a socially inept freak. However, as cliche as a lot of the dialogue can be and a lot of the characters can be, I do think the overall level of quality here, I've never seen from a Nintendo game before. This all feels phenomenal. All the human characters look great in this game. They look genuinely like they belong in a AAA game like this, which I'm not really gonna give like points for this. I mean, like, it's kind of doing the bare minimum for what you'd expect out of a $70 game in 2025. Rather, I just think it's kind of cool to see that from a Nintendo game. You know, we've never seen such realistic detail in a Nintendo game like this before. Which, yeah, talking about Metroid Prime 4's visuals, easily the best part of the game. This game looks gorgeous. Not graphically the most impressive game ever, but definitely the best we've seen on Nintendo Switch 1, and also an incredibly promising start to Nintendo Switch 2. I would love to see what they can do with a Prime 5 that's made exclusively for Switch 2, but even then, the Switch 1 version of this game, it doesn't feel like it holds the Switch 2 version back. This game doesn't feel compromised visually in any way, and I think that's incredibly impressive. I think a lot of the music is really good. I honestly really like Sylux's theme in the game. When you're battling him, he has like a certain theme that's just kind of stuck in my head. It feels very impactful. I really like it. It sucks Sylux is just a nothing character still, but I do like his theme. And even just the opening title sequence, that got me pumped about the game. When that leaked out and I saw footage of the title sequence and it says Nintendo Presents, you get the Metroid theme on electric guitar and it goes into kind of like the Metroid Prime kind of chorus going, ah! Even the damn shots of the fucking thing in the logo, I honestly forget what it's called. It's this thing Psylocke is fucking around with at the beginning that transports them to a different world. I don't give a shit. I didn't really give a shit about the story. But I mean, like I'm saying, the up-close shots of that on the title screen look really nice. Everything about this game looks and sounds really nice. I love the attention to detail Retro has. I mean, this stuff has been like a Metroid Prime tradition ever since the very start. But even just like, oh yeah, sometimes when you're going back and forth between your map screen and the main game, because you're always viewing this through Samus's perspective, even just getting like a little glimpse of like Samus's reflection sometimes, that is just such a crazy attention to detail. It's just so charming every time I see it. And when I say charming, it almost makes it sound like I'm saying like, oh, that's cute. Like, no, I'm just saying like, it's just really charming to me that they think about all of these little details and they really try to sell the fact that it's just like, no, yeah, you are Samus through the visor. The little things like when you go to Ice Belt and this flurry of snow just kind of hits you in the face and Samus's arm is like trying to shield her face and you see kind of the frost build up on her arm cannon. Just little things like that are so fun to see. It just really helps to immerse you in this world. And that's what I really love about Retro Studios design. They create these living, breathing worlds. Some of the best art direction in the business, honestly. But sadly, I'd say that's the best element of Prime 4. And I think a lot about this game gives me hope for the future rather than satisfies me at all with the final product. I mean, the ending is just fucking atrocious. Like, the last, I would say, 20% of this game, it's not good. Primarily because a lot of it is focused on already what is the weakest part of the game, which is Soul Valley, your awful, awful open world hub area. This thing is so empty for how large it is. And you can clearly tell this was done to pad out the game. If Soul Valley was not a part of this game and you trim the fat of everything else, I think this game would end up being like 5 to 6 hours long. But with Soul Valley, with all of the needless backtracking, because like I said, all of these different stages don't really connect to each other at all. You have to always go right back through Soul Valley. And then the first area you were in, Fury Green, also kind of acts as a bit of a hub area because that's where the Galactic Federation kind of sets up base camp. So you have to keep going back there to get upgrades and to do a couple little things here or there. And that just screams to me that like all of this was pieced together because like, why wouldn't you set up base camp in Soul Valley? That would make Soul Valley make a ton more sense if like, oh yeah, this is where the base camp is. Instead, Fury Green kind of acts as your secondary hub world and Soul Valley is your main hub world. And Soul Valley is just bad. Like, there's nothing about it that I can really go like, oh yeah, this is great. I think it could have worked, but I think they were just getting to a point in development where they had to just trudge forward with what they had. Because if they took any time to tweak Soul Valley and make things different, I think that probably would have added another like 2 to 3 years to this game's dev time. The only thing going on in Soul Valley are a bunch of green crystals, which barely come into play into the game until the very end. Right when you finish the 5th major area, you pretty much have to go through Soul Valley and grind the green crystals. And I had to do that for like 2 hours because even when I knew, I had heard that like, oh yeah, you're gonna need green crystals for the end of the game. As I would go through Soul Valley, I would take some time to like run into the green crystals, collect them up. But when I would go to my menu screen, I would see that like, man, I just don't have a ton. Yeah, you need a ton of these things. And while you can kind of collect them sparingly throughout the whole game, there's nothing they really do until the very end. I feel like they should have been incentivizing you throughout the game with things the green crystals would actually do to make it so then you had a reason to keep collecting them. Because for the most part, every now and then Miles McKenzie would tell you, hey, by the way, you should keep collecting green crystals. I don't know what the fuck for, but you should just do it. Well, either way, the only way you're gonna get like a ton of green crystals is if you have a lot of the abilities you end up getting very late in the game. Like, you need the psychic power bomb to blow up a lot of the bigger like rocks in Soul Valley where a ton of the green crystals are. And you need a lot of like your elemental powers to access the shrines in the game, which also have a lot more green crystals within them. But let's talk about the shrines. There's like, what, 10 of them, and they act pretty much identically to like how a shrine in Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom is. The difference is the shrines in the Zelda games, there's like 100 plus of them, and they're actually pretty well designed. Prime 4 shrines, okay, the worst shrines in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are better than the best shrines in Prime 4. These things are barely anything. Some of them I could barely constitute as puzzles. And that's the thing, I think the idea of shrines in a Metroid Prime game are actually pretty cool, and it honestly makes this game oftentimes feel more like a Zelda game than a Metroid game. And I think the shrines could have made Soul Valley make a lot more sense, but you needed a piss ton more of them, and they actually need to be like much more in-depth puzzle rooms. Because as they are, they're kind of more so like, hey, use this ability. All right, hey, that was the puzzle. Good for you. Collect some green crystals and you get a little ability upgrade here. There you go. That's a shrine in Metroid Prime 4. Blech. Go back to Soul Valley that has no fucking purpose until like the very end of the game, like literally in the last 20%, the last 2 hours of the game for me. A huge chunk of it was spent grinding green crystals in Soul Valley and picking up mech parts and just wrapping everything up. But even then, before that giant ass Soul Valley portion, the last major area is the Great Mines, and that's the most linear ass stage in the entire game. It's literally just walking forward for the most part. That area sucks. And story-wise, they tried to do this dumb bullshit where the Federation soldiers like, oh no, Duke died. Oh no, Armstrong is holding back. She's just like, hey Samus, I'm gonna be okay. Save yourself. Go forward. And then when you complete it, they're just like, oh yeah, we're fine. What? But keep in mind, I am definitely venting right now because the last part of this game, it's not even like, oh my god, this is egregious. It's more so like, it's just frustrating because of its mediocrity. Because the game has moments of brilliance, but again, those brilliant moments are nothing that we haven't really seen from Metroid Prime before. It's just, these are brilliant moments where this is what makes Metroid Prime special, but it's nothing that feels like that unbelievably new. It's just Metroid Prime done well. In my opinion, if you want Metroid Prime done well, there you go. The final boss fight with Sylux is kind of like the only major part where Sylux actually does something in the game. He's at the beginning, and then he does like a little thing in Flare Pool, but the only other times you see him in the game, he's like an imposter. It's not the real Sylux. And then you get to the very end, and pretty much the only story thing that happens is Sylux goes, Samus, go yourself, and then you fight Sylux. And yeah, the final boss fight, the first phase with like all the arms and stuff, that was a little tricky. That took me like a good 30 minutes to an hour to like power through because I forgot to refill my health and ammo before I entered the final boss. Damn it. But then the final two phases, the one phase where you're kind of going through like, I don't know, that dimensional thing and you're hitting Sylux, that one's piss easy. Then the third one, it's harder than the second phase, but it's not that tricky. And for that to be the final phase, you know, the final hit you land on Sylux, that ending feels like a wet fucking blanket. It is so fucking whatever. It doesn't feel like, yeah, I got him. The final hit you land on Sylux feels like there should be something else that happens, but the final thing that happens is its stupid ass cliffhanger ending where Sylux reappears and then the Galactic Federation has to hold him back, and then Samus like ends up escaping, and that just felt a little like, okay, so what? They're just gonna fucking die? That was a wet sack of rats as an ending. It looked nice, like, you know, that final cutscene where Samus puts the memory fruit in the ground and it starts to grow and shit, to just like kind of honor the memory of these fucking creeps. I don't know. Yeah, I know getting a lot of scans is a big element of the Metroid Prime game. Yeah, I ended with like not even 30% scans. I just didn't really care. I think going for 100% scans in a game like this is absurd. There's so many that you can just miss, and you can't just go back through the game. You pretty much have to get 100% of 100% of everything on your first playthrough if you want 100% completion. I'm just like, that's not worth it for me. I'm gonna scan what I want to scan, and that's it. So yeah, that's pretty much Metroid Prime 4. It's definitely a game that when you take a look at the development history, you can definitely understand why it came out the way it did. Which again, is not a bad game. I don't regret playing through it. And I honestly think this is a great first game for a lot of people that may be interested in Metroid Prime. I think it does a good job kind of teaching you what a Metroid game is about while also kind of, you know, spoon feeding it to you. And I think tons of elements of this game are incredibly appealing. But this game as a whole gets bogged down with a lot of elements that just don't fully come together. And you know, I do really like that whenever I look at discussion about this game online, I oftentimes see most people saying, yeah, it was okay, but I have a lot of high hopes for Prime 5. This doesn't feel like a bad moment for Metroid. This seems like, well, it is what it is, but the future does look bright. Because judging by the fact that Retro had to do so much hiring in preparation of this game, they need to build a team that could work on Metroid Prime. And even before this game released, Nintendo announced that, like, hey, Prime 4 is the start of a new series for Metroid. You don't need to play the original Prime trilogy to understand this. And yeah, I agree. It's pretty much a reboot that's still a continuation. And yeah, you can tell there's greatness here. You can tell this team was unbelievably talented, but it's obvious they had to work with a lot of ideas that weren't fully fleshed out. And by the time this game got to a point where, like, okay, like everything makes sense, we have all the levels here and we have the hub world and stuff, I'm sure Retro and Nintendo could see that, like, yeah, this Soul Valley open world is dog shit. But to be honest, I think they made the right call to just kind of move forward. Yeah, certain elements of this game aren't great, but it all does come together to create a complete package. It's not great, but it's also not a bad game. And it's really unfortunate that this was at one point one of the most hyped up Nintendo games. But in the end, all that hype and all of those expectations ended up leading to a game that everybody is just kind of like going, okay, well, hopefully they get it right the next time, which is at least good that this is kind of seen as like the start of a new era for Metroid. You know, if this is all we got and it wasn't obvious that, like, oh yeah, we're definitely going to get a Prime 5, this feels very similar to like Shenmue 3. Shenmue 3 took decades to release, and when it finally did, like, they leave that on a cliffhanger. Nothing really of note happens in that game. And this feels very similar. I don't feel like much happens in this game. Like, it doesn't really do much, and then it ends on a cliffhanger. We still don't know why the we should give a shit about Psylocke. However, I don't think this is as infuriating as Shenmue 3. I think this is very much, it is what it is. And what it is Metroid Prime 4. We finally got it. And honestly, the most disappointing thing about it is the fucking Switch 2 box art. Jesus Christ, the disclaimer's as big as Samus's head.